Let's Get To presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here come the Astros, burning with desire. Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros, with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, number one every time. Go, go, Astros!
We want Houston! We want Houston!
For the second time in 6 years, the Astros are baseball's best.
And now, Go Astros, a web series dedicated to the two-time world champs from H-Town, presented by three guys who remember Bob Nepper.
Hey, good morning, Astros. Hey, good morning, Astros Nation. It is Monday, November 28th. It is still 2022, and that means it is a year in which, as James is pointing out, the Houston Astros won the World Series. They are the champions of the world and will be on, well, really until next year. And hey, maybe they'll do it again. That was my wish for Baseball Santa. I had two wishes, but that was my second one. And, Baseball Santa, I tried to be good this year, so we'll see how that goes. But I think getting to winning 2023 it's often said by some of the offseason moves. The good news is the team has most of the pieces back from last year, most of the players who are really good, and only sort of a few holes that they need to address. On the other hand, who's going to address them is a question. And in the 2 weeks since we've got the smallest bit of crumbs about sort of what a general manager search would look like. And the one sort of major headline out of the interview that Brian McTaggart did with Jim Crane is that the process will take a while and it'll last sometime into 2023, I think Crane said, after the new year. Does this seem a reasonable way to sort of run this search here? Especially now we haven't heard any names leaked of. Crane said there were some guys he'd identified, but as best I've seen, no leaks of any sort of interviews or any candidates other than just sort of broad sets of speculation, nothing sort of informed reporting. What's your impression of this process here? Does this seem to be this is a good way to go about this?
I think it's a reaction to the way the process went last time, where, and Crane has said as much, where his hand was kind of forced. It was certainly his decision to fire Jeff Lunau and to fire AJ Hinch when he did, but those guys were going to be.
We think it was his decision to fire Lunau.
That is the public story, sir. But they either way, they weren't going to be available for the 2020 season, such as it was. And so Crane very much felt that he took the best candidate he could get on short notice, and that was James Click. Great. They lived together for 3 years in kind of a tempestuous relationship where Crane and Click just didn't get along, and we've gone into the reasons for that. I think I think his desire for a longer search is to make sure he gets a partner that he can live with for more than a 3-year contract, which I think is doing your due diligence, is what I would expect him to do at this point, which is very, I don't want to upset Jeff Passan, but it's very un-Jerry Jones-like to not make a reactionary hire or, hire one of your relatives. I guess if he does hire a relative, we can find out and bitch about it at that point. But until then, I think a lengthy, methodical search is exactly what you would need. When you talk about executive hiring in the real world, the non-baseball world, one of the things you will hear is slow to hire, quick to fire. And that slow to hire means you are looking for somebody who is a cultural fit, somebody who is the job fit, skills fit, has the vision, but it takes time to assess all of that. Once you get them in, you can figure out pretty quickly if they're going to be the guy or not. And in baseball, they give you contracts, so you don't have to worry about that quick fire thing. But I think that's what you're seeing right now is a more methodical search for Crane to be happier with whoever he picks to be the next general manager.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on that, I think it does make all the sense in the world. I think, we talk about we're wanting to have questions about who some of the candidates are, and we are 23 days away, as Andy pointed out before we got online, from winning this title back here. imagine that situation truncated because it all happened in January. You report to spring training 2 months later, and some of the guys you want are probably under contract. Maybe you don't let some of the guys that you let walk from Luno's front office if you would have known this was coming. I think the other part of it too, why it makes sense, really two things. One, MLB is not football. So you have to make sure you have needs identified. I think there's a couple of glaring holes that these assistant GMs can fill. The draft is important, clearly, but it isn't NFL important. I think we can all agree that you can overcome not having the perfect guy in place for draft time. And then you have the trade deadline. I think there's time. The other thing I keep thinking is the names that were kind of floated beforehand that were former Luhnow lieutenants are currently under contract. And maybe it's as simple as we're waiting for them to get out from under contract before making some kind of move. I don't know. I always prefer methodical over knee jerk. And I also think the other thing that would have hampered getting a GM that Crane might have liked in 2020 was not having the choice to hire his manager. We had to have a guy that would be willing to work with Dusty Baker. And I think Crane made the right decision then, saying personality in the clubhouse was more important than personality in the front office. Again, all remains to be seen, but I'm not going to panic about it just yet. Now, we get into April and we don't have a better sense of what's happening. Maybe then I'll be concerned.
I think the other thing to this that I would add is that not having somebody in the GM seats, and I'm certain there are people doing GM duties right now. There are 3 assistant GMs, but not having somebody in that GM seat really only affects your ability in the trade market. I don't think it affects your ability in the free agent market quite as much, because really that's a contract negotiation piece. Do you want to play here? Yes. Great. Here's the number. Great. Let's work on that. The trades, especially if you believe the romance of Moneyball as a movie or a book, that's the art of the deal, the negotiation, the dealing with your peers. That's probably the gap we have right now. And I don't know how active the Astros were expecting to be in the trade market versus the free agent market. The honest truth is, outside of the Angels, nobody's terribly active yet in any market. So I don't see it being a burden or being any kind of speed bump, other than if we were actively trying to trade for somebody we don't have a relationship with.
Yeah, but that can be managed. But I mean, part of what happens in a front office is that the assistant GMs and the people further down at the different jobs, they sort of come up with ideas. And in some ways, it's the job of the general manager less to come up with ideas than it is to manage a whole bunch of personnel. Mm-hmm. And, can that be done by the owner for a short period of time? Probably so. Will it be done differently? Obviously so. He doesn't have the long-term relationships with these guys. He hired them, but he didn't really hire them. They were hired by, someone else. So it's different, but, different is a thing. I will push back a little bit on Jim here, at least sort of offer this as sort of a counter proposal. A name that has surfaced is David Stearns, who is a former assistant general manager with the Astros, has been general manager and then president of baseball operations, #1 guy in the front office for the Brewers. And his contract expires at the end of next season. It's very clear he had some sort of arrangement with the Brewers that they wouldn't let him go earlier when the Mets were interested in him, but they've got sort of a managed departure with him.
Sure.
So you can't get him now without compensation, but you could get him, they may be willing to let him go on August 15th. Sort of his service to the Brewers would be done then, or, you'd have to wait to October 1st, but such as it is.
They may also be more amenable because it's an American League team versus a National League team.
Yeah.
And we've done so much for the Brewers throughout the history of the Astros that they could at least do us this one favor.
They do owe us a couple.
Or in a few.
It's not Bud Selig, so there's probably not someone turning a blind eye to all he's done to
I'm
this.
sure they have a ledger. Dripping in blood.
But it does lead to the question of, are you better off waiting a year? There are some costs to that. But basically, this offseason is going to be run by Jim Crane. And so it seems to me there's not urgency to hire a general manager on February 15th. The draft is mostly done by scouting directors and people further down the line. So it doesn't seem critical that we have it. If you're not going to have a general manager on November 15th, there's not much of an advantage to have it on February 15th, and maybe the date to target is August 15th.
Well, I'll take this one first if you don't mind, Andy. I kind of think, I think if we look at this as this macro Astros experience, and Andy and I talked about this when Luno left and Click came in. I think Luno was definitely the perfect guy to build the machine. And Andy and I both wondered, was his personality the guy to maybe keep it going past an initial iteration, right? And maybe we stumbled into the right guy who wasn't knee-jerk trade guy, who was making small moves that recognized keeping this thing going. But now that we're starting to rebuild a farm system, I think maybe waiting and figuring out what is phase 3 to copy the Avengers sort of model. What does phase 3 of this Astros dynasty look like? And I think one of the things the Astros have always been really good about in this run is not sitting on their laurels when it comes to anything. We talked about this a bunch, Brian, like how they will scout one way and then completely redo it the next way, which is why teams can't keep up. So again, I think if the logic is you're okay with going into, like you said, February without a guy, then I think wait till you find the absolute right fit, as long as it's not your son. So that's it for me.
All right. Our apologies to Jared Crane, but sorry, not sorry, Jared.
I'm dealing with Stephen Jones, buddy. I don't have room for two.
Hey, Jared's going to end up owning the team someday. He doesn't need to worry about, being the GM right now.
True.
He's the Prince Charles of Dallas.
But exactly. I do think, I think Crane is smart enough. Look, Jerry Jones, I think, to use a Cowboys comparison, bought it so he could be an NFL mover and shaker, right? I think he always went into that thinking, you don't fire Tom Landry while he's on the golf course unless you're planning to have your hands dirty through the whole thing. I think Crane sees this as a family investment that he doesn't want to fall apart. And I don't think so. I think hopefully he's smart enough to recognize no limitations when it comes to running a baseball team. Hopefully.
I will say this, that he's, given this interview to McTaggart and talked about getting another general manager is a strike against the Jerry Jones argument. Jerry Jones has hired his relative to be general manager. It's all in the family. And, that doesn't seem to be a good strategy in any sport. But
no, and I actually
good shape to make the playoffs this year. I understand. By the way, shout out to all the Texans fans because James, point to the banner again. Yes, once again, please be this is why it's a good idea to be an Astros fan right now.
Yeah.
And let me say this as an SEC fan, Bryce Young's very good. So hopefully, he really does the trick next year.
Not that we want to switch. I'm sorry, but not that we want to switch to Texans talking. I'm not doing that. It did strike me yesterday as I walked out after the first Tua Tagovailoa, I can't say his name, Dolphins touchdown against the Texans yesterday, to go grocery shopping because that was a more fruitful use of my time. Growing up in Houston, you were a Cowboys fan or an Oilers fan. Most of us were Oilers fans. There were a few like Jim that weren't. But it was a football town.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest outcome beyond the two championships of the Astros run from really 2015 till today, these last 7 years, have been that Houston is a baseball town now. And I think it's not disputable. I think even if the Texans somehow made a playoff run next year, which they will not do, but just say they did, you'd have people excited about it, but it's still a baseball town. And that's a big deal in Texas because that was not the case growing up when you had two teams that were similarly successful. It's just very interesting, the transition that has happened in my lifetime, really, about where the Astros ranked as being this fun kind of distraction. And you were going to see the inside of the park as much as you were going to see the team playing in it, to something that really drives the social and emotional calendar of an entire city. It's neat to see.
It's weird because as a kid, I always thought it could be that, and I guess maybe it comes from, again, never being an Oilers fan ever in my life. And so always feeling like, no, Houston's team is the Astros because they were my team and I'm self-involved. And so it's kind of nice to see at least that kind of thing come to fruition.
Yeah. And the best evidence of that for me, I happened to be in Houston in October for a charity gala that my mother was running, which is why I got the invitation. And it was during, I believe, game 3 of the ALCS. And so, they start and the priest gets up. It's Catholic events, and the priest gets up, and we pray for God. Everyone's real respectful. We salute the charity work and the millions of dollars raised by this organization over its century, and everyone gets a big cheer. And then 5 minutes later, he goes up. The score is final in New York. The Astros have won, and there's this huge cheer because we were all paying attention to it on our phones because, that's the thing we were focused on. For obvious reasons. It's become, even I have a sense of it. You can see here from New York City, the place where you get the best understanding of what the Astros culture is like. But it even filters up here. And my wife is a Red Sox fan, and it was over a decade ago because we didn't have our child yet. The Astros were playing, it would have been an interleague game at Yankee Stadium, and we were preparing to go. And as we're getting ready, I'm dressing and putting on an Astros shirt. And my wife, the Red Sox fan, says, "Oh, what's everyone going to say to you when you get to Yankee Stadium?" And I turned to her and say, "They're going to say absolutely nothing. I will be greeted by complete and total indifference. We're a Red Sox fan, and everyone has an opinion about your team.
Yeah.
I am an Astros fan, and no one has an opinion about mine." And
people still don't know what Astro is short for unless you're out of Houston.
Yes. And 11 or 12 years later, again, it is a massive compliment to, obviously, the sign stealing scandal is a big part of that, right? But part of why the sign stealing scandal still resonates is everyone thought, oh, they weren't actually good. You see all these articles like they weren't actually good. And like, well, did you read all the studies that show that they didn't have a big deal? No.
Right.
You just assume they were only good because they cheated, which is,
those articles had numbers in them, and that's a lot.
It's a lot. But it's funny, Brian, like when I was in Boston this year, I walked into the little gift shop. I check out the gift shop, and I've got an Astros cap on, and a Yankee fan comes up to me and says, "You and I might have to fight our way out of this thing." And so the whole concept of what you're describing to, oh, we're at that level. I mean, it is cool. It's neat. I think to Andy's point, I think it really has made, I think it's really the golden era for a reason.
Yeah. And our hope is it continues. And we know 2023, they look to be in good shape regardless of whatever, far-sighted or short-sighted moves that are made by the front office. And the real question is the long term. But come on, guys, if we were sitting here in 2017 after that World Series and said, what's it going to be like 5 years from now? This is at the far end of any realistic scenario that any of us could have come up with. And, I've tried to enjoy every second of it because, as we all know in this room here, right, in the Zoom room here, right, it wasn't always like this, and it's not always going to be like this.
Absolutely. No, I think definitely. What a run.
Yeah. Good. Let's talk about our challengers in the run for 2023. The AL West has been, there hasn't been a lot of movement, but a lot of it has been centered on the AL West. Andy mentioned Anaheim. We'll get to them in a second because the clear sort of challenger in the AL West, our playoff opponent from this year, Seattle, they made a move to get actually former Astro, Teoscar Hernandez, one of the not as good moves from the last GM. Him as an Astros product was traded for Nelson Liriano, and we will always have those several outs he got in Game 7 of the World Series. But in the end, we probably needed an actual outfielder. Teoscar is a player who has great power, but lousy plate skills. He's in the last year before free agency, so he was cheap. He went for a reliever that Seattle decided, the Ryan Stanek of Seattle, basically. Reliever who has good numbers, but they didn't use in the playoffs. And their 8th best prospect On the other hand, Seattle didn't get a ton of production from its corner outfielders, particularly Jesse Winker, who they got in a trade this offseason, who seemed to be promising. It kind of seems Teoscar is going to replace him. I see this as mostly a status quo. It's a clear indication that Seattle's, for obvious reasons, thinking about winning the division, going to the playoffs again in 2023. But on the other hand, it's not a long-term move from them. I think it changes them just a little bit, but not a lot. James, I'll start with you.
No, I completely agree. I don't know that maybe Seattle is maybe differently good than before this move, but I don't know that they're appreciably better. And, I think about, again, compared to the Astros, where we maybe had, your numbers can back it up, Brian. We had the weakest offense of this run. There's no reason to expect it will not get addressed and therefore be better. And then pitching wins championships, as we've just seen, and all that pitching is coming back. So particularly in comparison to the Astros, it doesn't mean much. And to me, I found some of the moves perplexing that they've made. Almost like, between that and the really huge deals they've given to a couple of people, that's not a formula for long-term success. And so I think it's interesting, but I agree with you completely. I don't know that they're really any better. They just might be differently better than they were.
Andy?
For me, it's about chasing power for Seattle. Seattle doesn't have a lot of guys who can hit the ball out of the ballpark, or at least they didn't last year. And so whether or not he is effectively replacing Jesse Winker and his 11 home runs or Mitch Haniger and his 14 home runs, he's going to get one of the corner outfield spots. He's going to hit, I think he hit 25 or 26 home runs last year. If he plays every day, he's going to have a similar power numbers. He is worse defensively than either one of those players. He is a high strikeout guy. And one of the things I've noticed from Seattle's build is they don't have yet the emphasis on plate discipline that teams that seem to go far in the playoffs have. So you can beat them with fastballs. You can beat them with pitches off the plate because they don't have a whole lot of discretion about not swinging at those things. And they just added another guy who fits that mold. He's going to strike out a lot. He's going to be worse defensively, but occasionally he's going to hit a ball really, really far. And Seattle is at that stage of their franchise history where that's probably good. We like home runs. That'll bring fans in, so we like that. And if we have more fans, we can sign better guys. I don't think Seattle's done by any means, but this didn't move the needle for me, knowing that it's just kind of more of the same.
Yeah. The biggest need is at second base. They brought in Adam Frazier last year, and that move didn't work out. He played poorly. The big issue is there's not a lot of high-quality second basemen on the free agent market, so there's some, suggestion that they may sign one of the big shortstops and then move J.P. Crawford to second base.
But he won a Gold Glove at shortstop in 2020 over Carlos Correa somehow.
And maybe he'll win it at second base over Jose Altuve in 2023. Good for him, right? It's one of the more curious moves when they locked him up long term, because it seemed to me one of the players who he was good, but you could improve on. That was flexibility.
It's the baseball equivalent of smelling your own farts, right? He's a guy that they brought up through their system. He was the first guy that they brought up through their system. He had some success. They want to show commitment to those guys, so they signed him to a long-term deal.
He's highly likable. He's good with the fans. I mean, there's some
and not that it was a mistake, but they've done the same thing with Julio Rodriguez, where he is. And he's going to be a great player. I'm not saying it was a mistake to sign him long term, but that's a ridiculous contract for 1 year of performance.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And there was no reason to do it other than to prove to the fans that we're serious about winning. I'd be more interested if they, went out and got Aaron Judge, or went out and got another really high quality starter, which I think is what their downfall is going to be again in 2023. But they don't appear to be wanting to do much more than they did this year, which just make the playoffs and hope something good happens.
Well, they expect development from players like Rodriguez, though it's hard for him to play much better, and George Kirby in particular in the rotation, and Logan Gilbert. So they have some sense that their young players may come up. But as I compare them to the Astros of like 2015, 2016, they don't have as many good young players. And we've got to fill in more holes.
And one of their best young players is already dealing with back issues. So, and we've watched enough sports to know that that's not great.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention to Anaheim, who's been the busiest team, as Andy noted earlier. They signed Tyler Anderson to a 3-year contract. They traded essentially from sort of organizational surplus to take on the salaries of both Hunter Renfroe and Gio Urshela, both of whom will be free agents next year. We expected the Angels to be very passive this offseason, mostly waiting for their ownership to change. They seem to be all in on how many wins in 2023? 88, 90 if things go well. It's a strategy that is this Perry Manassian trying to save his job or this way? I think this is Perry Manassian trying to save his job before the new owners come in and want their own guy.
So Tyler Anderson's interesting to me in that he is a worse than league average pitcher every year, except for the 1 year he pitches half his games in Dodger Stadium. And there's a reason that pitchers tend to do well at Chavez Ravine. The Big A plays a lot different than Dodger Stadium does. I would expect him to fall more to the high 3s, low 4 ERA kind of pitcher than the 2.57 that he was with the Dodgers. Good for him, but he's also going to be in year 34. I think his he'll turn 34 on December 30th of this year. He was born the year I graduated from high school, so congratulations. But it's a stopgap, and we have all long said that the Angels need more pitching. Good for them. I don't see this guy being more than a middle of the rotation kind of player, and you've got to hope, if you're an Angels fan, that he's going to give you some bang for that buck, because the projection that at least Baseball Reference has doesn't make you feel great about the contract he signed. The other two guys, they're end of their career type players that you got. They're going to be free agents. They will be fungible at the trade deadline again. But picking up Gio Urshela, who I guess is going to play shortstop, because you still have Rendon on that team, and he can't really play anywhere else unless he's going to be your full-time DH. And then what do you do with Ohtani when he's not pitched? I mean, there's a lot of – it was a weird pickup for Urshela. And Hunter Renfroe, I am convinced, is going to give you 25 home runs, because that's what he does. And other than that, his big value is looking exactly like Mike Trout. So when Mike Trout inevitably gets hurt, you can just put him in center field and go, same guy, it's good.
Totally.
Come buy tickets.
They need a body double for Mike Trout on the road, and that's a real valuable asset that Renfroe can provide.
It kept Saddam Hussein in power for a really long time.
No, I kind of agree with you, Brian. I think it's all in, but I think it's actually all in on what is probably going to be the last year of Shohei Ohtani as an Angel. And maybe this is, I don't know if this is we're showing you we're willing to win kind of move, but like you said, the whole concept of how many of these deals that they got are going to expire at the end of the year. Like, these are not long-term fixtures. It does seem very on brand with the Angels to throw a lot of money at nothing. It seems to me, I would be like, if I'm in charge of the Angels and I know I'm about to sell, I start figuring out a way to move Ohtani and basically do a politically relevant joke, which is to basically do the equivalent of the Herschel Walker trade of the Cowboys in the 90s, although not running for Senate might be a good thing. But yeah, to me, I think, I guess I'm so over everybody, including Scott McIntyre, who's a big part of Let's Get To You, thinking this is the Angels' year. I'm not even going to worry about them until it is, because I'm so tired of hearing about them.
Hey, the Angels may get off to one of those starts again like they did this past year.
They're very close, really, guys.
Good. It looks really good for 3 weeks.
They're very close. They're very close.
I mean, again, they took Phil Nevin, who I was not impressed by the job he did, and gave him a 1-year contract, which means, again, there's so much sort of everything's on this year. They're going to sell the team here, and then it'll move on. So those are the big moves of the AL West. Hey, it's the offseason, so we can gauge in. I'll put in my notes here some offseason whimsy, or sort of looking at sort of some different kind of questions here. And the one I thought of is I figured we would lean into we would lean into the fact that, again, we did not start cheering for the Astros on the game one of the World Series in 2017.
Right.
We didn't move over because we saw a tweet from JJ Watt about it, but we have been, again, have enough knowledge of this team back to understand the Craig Reynolds, Dickie Thon platoon from our childhood. So the sort of exit question for all of you, for both of you, is what's your first memory of the Astrodome? And obviously that can include the Oilers, or I guess U of H football, or the rodeo, or some concert you
Tennis.
saw. So, or tennis, I guess that's, yeah. Or
Muhammad Ali fought there.
Yeah. So, Andy, you graduated high school the earliest of all of us, which you've already mentioned here. So, I will let you go
All
first
right.
here.
And yet I have more hair than both of you.
What are you talking about? I've got a full head of hair. I mean, your hair's longer, I guess.
It is.
By the way, I got to tell you, this was so much cheaper than a fake ID before I turned 21, and so much more believable.
Because I
So
don't look like some hippie. All right, Andy. All right. Maybe you should go spit on some GIs when you're done with the show.
That's right. I have long hair, so I hate the military. My first memory, and I think we've probably said this before in one of the iterations of this show, but I had to be 8, maybe. And we were going to, it was 1981, so we were going to see Nolan Ryan pitch, I thought. And I didn't know who that was, but I knew it was a big deal because my dad was very excited about that. And my uncle had gotten the tickets, and it was me and my cousin and our dads. And we got there, and whoever had decided it was Nolan Ryan was wrong, and had miscounted the rotation, because back then it wasn't as easy as going online and seeing who was pitching the next day. You had to actually go, okay, 5 days, and then do a 4-pitch. Anyway, so it was this guy, and he looked like he was about 6'7", tall African-American gentleman by the name of J.R. Richard. And so my first experience that I remember in the Astrodome was watching J.R. Richard pitch. And I think he had something like 12 strikeouts, probably about 8 walks too, because he was that guy. But that was probably the moment that I fell in love with the Astros and the Astrodome. There is no way to describe going into the Astrodome the first time, whether you're an adult or a kid, because it was unlike anything anybody had ever seen to that point. I know the Superdome exists. I know the Kingdome was a copy of that, but the Astrodome was kind of otherworldly when you walked in for the first time. The scoreboard took up a third of the stadium outfield wall. The seats were rainbow colored. You had ushers in, depending on what year you went, astronaut uniforms. The grounds crew wore astronaut uniforms, or they were wearing Texans garb, like the rodeo was still going on, type thing. And it was, first experience in a team shop, first, all of that.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's hard to put into words how magical that experience was. And you walked in and they were playing baseball on this huge, you could have told me that green carpet went on for 3 miles and I would have believed you, because everything was just so much larger than life once you got inside the stadium.
All right, James.
Can I mention how tired my little legs were walking back to the car from the parking lot? Just kidding. No, it's weird because you told us to prep for this question. And so I spent the entire drive into work trying to prep for the question. And I couldn't think of one specific thing. It's like because you're young, it's this amalgam of moments. And, I remember one of the first times I went, my mom kind of having my eyes covered when we walked in. So when she pulled it back, I got it all at one time. And I still try to do that to this day when I go to a new ballpark. But seeing how massive it is, just how incredibly magical it was, right? And so it was one of those things where in many ways it was my happiest place on earth. And I do have specific game memories. I remember Barry Bonds yelling at me because I was being a bit of an asshole behind the Giants dugout, things like that. But I think I'll just remember how special it was because of how magical it was, and also just the romantic about baseball thing of my grandfather teaching me the game sitting in those orange seats. So that for me is always going to be my favorite memories of the Astrodome.
Yeah. Part of why I asked this question is I have a very sort of specific one, which is we moved to Houston in late summer, fall of 1980. So it must be 1981. My father's company had season tickets. So you could get it, each employee could basically get it for one game a year. And they were 5 seats behind the visiting dugout. So in the field boxes. So, most of the rest of my memories are sitting up in general admission in the outfield or in the upper deck. But, once a year we got to get the good tickets. And what I remember from this is someone had brought a set of 6 cowbells that had the tequila sunrise pattern on them, And why were they 6? Because they had painted over the tequila sunrise CABELL for Enos Cabell, cowbells for Cabell. And he had the front row seats. He put them on top of the dugout. And my memory is the Phillies and someone from the other team got so annoyed with the cowbells that they reached up out of the dugout, grabbed one of the cowbells away, prompting 700 ushers to show up to try to figure out what had happened and what to do about this. And I have no idea if the gentleman got his cowbells back, but, maybe he shouldn't have been ringing them, but I hope he got his cowbells back as well. He put some effort into making them and deserves that. So shout out to Enos Cabell, the first Astros legend in my mind. Shout out to Nolan Ryan and J.R. Richards, and to, I guess to Barry Bonds being a jerk, which is.
I guess the other flashback to that goes to Mitch Williams, his little time and John Hudek, who actually ended up coming in and striking out Barry Bonds. So yay.
Oh, okay.
Did he
So
show you his rib bone?
Hudek, who,
Show you his rib bone on his necklace?
Yep. And so that will do it for our show here today. We will be back soon because the winter meetings start next week, and the hot stove should start heating up. There's a need for a first baseman and an outfielder, so we'll see sort of what the Astros do about that. So James,
guys, no matter what happens with the drama, this happened not too long ago. Go Astros.
The Astros are going to be good. The Rangers, even if they sign Jacob deGrom, are not going to be good. Go Astros.
We will cover whoever Jacob deGrom signs with. I don't think it's going to be the Rangers, but we will cover their tiers at the appropriate point, and the Astros signings of who they do when that comes up. Go Astros.